If you're tuning in today, you probably already know this. Menopause isn't a new topic, but the way we are talking about it is changing. More women are in the workforce than ever before. Many are in their 40s and 50s, at the height of their experience, their responsibility, their leadership. And alongside that, there's a growing awareness that menopause is part of that story. So this isn't about introducing something new. It's about finally paying attention to something that's always been there. Welcome to Menopause and Work Conversations, a new series by the European Menopause and Andropause Society. My name is Professor Petra Stute. I'm a gynecologist and I'm the current EMAS President. This series builds on EMA's long-standing work, including the first global recommendations on menopause in the workplace, published in 2016 and updated in 2021, led by Professor Margaret Rees. In this first episode, we focus on what menopause actually looks like at work. What does it mean to be in a meeting after a sleepless night, to manage deadlines while dealing with brain fog, to carry on as so many women do without necessarily naming what's happening? To explore this, I'm joined by Professor Andrea Rumler from Germany, whose research spans Austria, Germany, and Switzerland, and Dr. Andrea de Rosa from the US, who brings a clinical perspective on how menopause symptoms affect women's daily lives and their ability to work. So, Andrea, welcome. And I would like to start asking you, from your research, how widespread is this issue?
Let's start with how many women work when they're in menopause age. And in the countries we surveyed, it's about 80%. So there's a very high rate of women working in this age range, let's say between 40 and 60. And something like 85-90% of them experience menopause symptoms. And most of them also state that their ability to work is affected. And this can have several causes. This is, sleepless nights, something we all know. That the next day or the day after we're still affected if we haven't slept well. This is short periods of depression. This is heat waves. This is sore muscles. This is heart problems. So we asked women in 3 countries, and we are planning a 4th survey in Europe this summer. And we got similar results from them. So again, 85% of them, 90% sometimes even report symptoms. And again, it's affecting their ability to work.
Thank you very much for the research insights. And of course, we also would like to get to know more about what women are actually experiencing during this stage. And Angela, can you help us with that?
So it's interesting to me is that a lot of folks think that women just start to experience symptoms starting in their 50s. But the ovary just doesn't shut down in one day and one night. It really is almost a decade to a decade and a half before the ovary shuts down that women start to experience symptoms. So it's not uncommon, and actually it's very common, that women start to experience significant symptoms in their mid-30s all the way up to the menopause and then after if they're not properly treated. And the way I like to break it down is typically women in their mid to late 30s start to experience the dreaded testosterone deficiency symptoms, which is the first hormone to go and actually our most abundant hormone. And it's the testosterone deficiency will lead to mood disorders. It can lead to new onset panic attacks. It can lead to insulin resistance, glucose problems, diabetes, and all of the risks that come from that. It can also lead to the weight gain that comes from the insulin resistant. And then when we get into our 40s, we typically start to experience the sleep disorders, hot flashes, night sweats, our hair starts falling out, our skin gets old and jowly and yellow. And this whole time it is really difficult because it often leads to body dysmorphia and a lack of confidence that women start to experience. And That is just touching the tip of the iceberg. There's lots more symptoms, some much more atypical than that. But it's a big deal, and women don't feel well. They get extremely tired during this time, and it becomes very difficult to function, in particular if the testosterone deficiency is making them really irritable and we don't cope as well.
This indeed sounds very terrible, but I must admit that I see the same patients here in our clinic. So I would like to further investigate with you, how do these symptoms affect women at work?
So when you think about the symptoms that I just went through, so let's start with kind of the mood disorders. So if we start to get depressed or anxious, having panic attacks, it really makes it difficult to concentrate at work or even to cope with the stressors that can come to work. And you may just throw your hands up and say, I don't want to do this anymore. You're just not as effective as you used to be. And as we know, mood disorders and depression and anxiety can be very debilitating, and women may not want to go to work. They may kind of want to huddle into their bedroom and to get their teddy bear or their cats and dogs and just say the heck with it for the day. But if they're also not sleeping, in particular having regenerative sleep, they're going to be really tired and foggy throughout the day, which is going to impact their executive thinking. So it really becomes a lot about that concentration, the ability to process and take information, creatively think, critically and do a critical analysis of information, and ability to work effectively. But a lot of it, it's just you're downright tired and you don't feel like you can do anything anymore. And also I've seen a lack of confidence in women as they move through this because they don't have anyone to turn to. Their bodies are changing. They're getting body dysmorphia. They don't feel good about themselves. They have these mood disorders that are layering on top of that. It can really take a hit to your confidence, even at work, when you may be at the top of your game.
Thank you very much for the clinical insights. And now I would like to move to you back again, Andrea. So have you also found this in your research about the impact of all these symptoms on the work capability?
First of all, I would like to cite some British studies, because this aspect I want to mention first. We didn't study the impact of these symptoms on productivity and on work changes in work participation. British researchers found out it's like on average like half an hour per week that women are less productive if they suffer from untreated menopause symptoms. Okay, so this is, at first doesn't sound dramatic, but there are other things that affect productivity too. So if you can avoid this is a good idea to do it, because this sums up. What we did is we asked women about career choices they made during their menopause, the time of menopause. And we heard from, depending on the country, the question, but in many cases, like 15-20% who reduced their working hours, who changed jobs, who refused a promotion. This was less than 20%, but nevertheless, we had this. We had very, very few women who said, I work more. And we had in Germany, for example, 10% of women say we are thinking about early retirement, or we already have retired early. And I would just like to cite one so-called industry. It's not a real industry. You see in a moment where this is dramatic. And the industry I want to talk about is police. Many police women in their 40s, in menopause, quit their jobs because, simply speaking, they don't have toilets they can go to, and they go crazy when they, work outside of the office. So it really depends on the type of job. But if you don't have an office job, if you have no home office job option, you might be heavily affected. And we can see this. And they quit their jobs and they sort of don't really know why, and only realize a lot later. So I think we need to stop this.
Thank you. So I think we very well understand how these symptoms can significantly affect daily function and overall work ability. So this also leads to my next question to you, Andrea. So if the impact on menopausal symptoms is that huge on the ability to work, we may or definitely need some changes in companies and organizations. So the question for you now is, what are the consequences for companies and organizations?
In a way, I think from the company perspective, easier than most people think. Because what women want the most is, we found this research in all three countries very clearly, they want their managers to be aware of the fact that they are undergoing menopause and that this might temporarily affect their ability to work. They just want recognition as number 1 and 2 and 3. So they want colleagues and managers to understand this. This is for free, this doesn't cost the company a thing. Then there are smaller changes you can do, from looking for, if you have work clothes that women have to wear, like when they work in sales, for example, make sure it's breathable materials. You need enough bathrooms around women in menopause. You need enough bathrooms anyway, but women have more challenges than men concerning bathrooms. You might, depending on the type of job, offer more flexibility temporarily, like more home office if you don't feel well, stuff like that. Again, all this is not expensive. Some companies go even further because they are desperate, because they realize so many women are leaving them. So they are offering, for example, medical consultations in their company. They are offering information, which in my opinion is not really the job of companies. This should be the job of our health system, to give information to women in menopause. But we don't have this yet at a level that it's reaching everybody. So all this companies can do, in my opinion, should do, if they are interested in keeping the woman in the workforce. I don't know how many companies in Germany do it at the moment. I know a number from 2024, and that was 7% of companies are offering some kind of menopause programs for women. So there's a lot to do.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to hand over to Angela. So in your opinion, what does this all mean for women themselves?
Well, I think it's interesting is that it not only directly affects the woman at hand, but I think it also negatively impacts much younger women, given the lack of institutional knowledge that could be left if women leave in droves when they hit menopause. But so when we think about mentorship and that ability to learn from other female executives who are really powerful and have that knowledge, so not only does that woman leave the workforce, but she takes her institutional knowledge and ability to mentor. And I always think it's so interesting in nature when you even look at large mammal groups. For example, elephants, the true leader of those groups are the wisest and eldest female, because they have that knowledge of where the riverbanks were and where to get proper food. And it's that same concept, although a lot of women are no longer in their reproductive years, that wisdom that comes from time in a workplace is so important to that younger generation, so that we can learn from. So I think it's multifactorial, but for that direct woman to layer onto what Andrea had said, that these women, a lot of them had already sacrificed many years during the childbearing and child rearing years. And now they get this limited time. And if menopausal symptoms are so severe and there's no support at a workplace, they're going to cut short those very few years that they may already have. And you think about the longevity of that, they're not going to make the money they may need to properly retire and live a comfortable life. And if they're not properly treated, they're more likely to develop chronic illness, which we know the cost of healthcare is rising and is incredibly expensive. And women live longer than men. So we need to be able to financially put ourselves into a good position so that we're not dependent on others to care for us in the event, in particular if they can't. So I think it really handicaps women when we don't allow them to continue at the peak of their career and peak earning years to be able to continue to set themselves up financially for an effective retirement when the time does come. So there's so many issues with this that honestly, I could talk hours and hours about it, but it's important that we support up and lift up our women, in particular at that time frame when they are holding that institutional knowledge, and because the rest of the organization is dependent on it too, if we just look at what's going on.
So indeed, we may wonder why this is a challenge still today. And it seems like the challenge is not a lack of knowledge, but how that knowledge is applied in practice. So Angela, so is it only about the workplace or also about something else?
Well, it's certainly a much broader perspective. It's about work. It's about relationships. It's about our families and children, and our own personal health. That those hormonal changes impact every aspect of our life. If we can't work effectively, we're putting ourselves at financial risk. If we're not feeling good about ourselves, and we have mood disorders, or let's say our libido drops because either sex is painful or we don't have adequate testosterone, our relationships are affected because we lose that glue of intimacy that can keep partnerships together. Families can be disrupted. I think of the older generation of women. A lot of our grandmas and older aunts, they were taking Xanax and drinking constantly to deal with their symptoms. But now women are snowed with antidepressants that they don't need, that can dramatically affect their personalities and care for their families. And just looking at this as a straight internal medicine physician, these hormones are the key to unlocking prevention of chronic illness. If our estrogen drops, our arteries harden, we develop high blood pressure, or we develop cholesterol disorders. If our testosterone's low, we develop insulin resistance and diabetes and the cardiovascular risk, and all these impacts that we just want to assign hormones to hot flashes and night sweats. But it's way bigger than that. It is truly the key to healthful aging and keeping our bodies physiologically strong. And I really want to see if there's one thing by the time I die that medicine looks at menopause is not just an opportunity to prevent hot flashes and night sweats and insomnia, but as a way to be able to manage aging so that women can age beautifully, physiologically on the inside.
So thank you. And somehow it seems as if we are talking since years about menopause, but still, why is it still important to talk about it and to keep talking about it? What's your opinion on that, Angela?
So, since I've been doing this for the last 30 years, I've seen tremendous change in women being much more frank and open and talking about it. But man, do we still have a long way to go. The fact that Bob Dole years ago here in the United States came out on national television and talked about erectile dysfunction, and on national TV, which we never thought we would hear that coming from a sitting senator at the time, and how that propelled erectile dysfunction into our discussions. We've been much, much slower to talk about menopause. And it's really amazing to me that we still have to be embarrassed to talk about something that's all of us are going to go through if, God willing, we live long enough. And I'm loving seeing this younger generation. They're much more open, and despite some of the faults and flaws of social media, a lot more information's coming out, and we are talking about it. But the problem I see is we're not taking it seriously. It still seems to be fodder for jokes and the laughter, but we really need to get serious about it in our work production and in our everyday lives, because it does dramatically impact us. And the conversations have to get deeper versus surface level. It's getting better, but we do have a long way to go.
And this is a perfect handover to Andrea, because you already mentioned that we have to dive deeper into the topic. And Andrea, why is it so important to get data and to analyze data on this topic?
First of all, we have to get a lot more data because there's hardly been research. Yes, we know some medical, but not that much medical research, but hardly any research on the impact of menopause to the workplace. And we also don't know what helps women the best. We know from our research what women would like to have as a support, but we don't really know what works, evidence-based. So I think there's a lot to find out. We should also try to figure out with which type of information we can reach women the best. So how to communicate, how to finally break this taboo. So there's a lot to do, and data helps. Data helps to win over any person in business. Data helps to win over politicians, to convince them to help us.
Thank you. And as you have already mentioned, Andrea, we are just at the beginning of getting more information, more data, more clinical insights. So thank you very much to both of you. This is just the beginning of the conversation. So across countries, across disciplines, and across workplaces, there are many people working to better understand and respond to menopause, from research and clinical care to policy, occupational health, and human resources. In the next episodes, we will continue to explore these perspectives, bringing in voices from different fields and different contexts to understand what is changing, what is working, and what still needs to be done. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you.